This is a controller. This is also a controller. One controller, two controller, red controller, blue controller. And yeah, this is also a controller. If you have ever played a video game, you've likely used a game controller of some sorts. They come in a lot of different shapes, sizes, have many different features. Oftentimes they're very exclusive to the platform. Now the image that mostly comes to mind when you think about a game controller is probably something like this. It has two handles, a couple of analog sticks, a directional pad, some face buttons, and some triggers, and some top buttons. Usually also a home button, and some sort of a start, select, and now a share. Now while these sticks, face buttons, and triggers do often fulfill the definition of what makes a game controller, the most important trait is that it controls games. This means that our phone screens, tablet screens, TV remotes, and even our freaking bodies if Microsoft had their way with their Kinect. So, with so much product diversity, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about some of the controllers that I used and found very comfortable, or even some that were a little bit more weird. To kick this off, I wanted to press start with one of my favorite controllers, the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller.
Nintendo has typically prioritized comfort when it comes to their devices.
This thing might have been a blind spot.
But this one is no exception. The handles perfectly contour to the grip of your fingers. The controller has some weight to it, but just enough to where you feel like you're holding something substantial without being hefty. The A, B, X, Y buttons are big, which ensures your finger won't slip while playing, and press in with a light click, while still being soft enough to give you a satisfying sensation of pressing a button. The D-pad is the best of its generational peers by being a pad that is designed as one button but still has 4 defined buttons, allowing 8-directional movement without issue. The sticks are offset from each other, obviously taking a note from Xbox, and offer a solid grip for their size. Rechargeable batteries are built in, requiring a standard USB-C cable to charge it up to its average of 40 hours of battery life. Seriously, compared to other modern controllers, it goes forever. The only thing I dislike about it are its triggers. Nintendo gave it digital triggers instead of analog, which means the triggers act as a standard button, you're either pressing it or you're not, where both Microsoft and Sony offer analog triggers which detect how far the trigger is being pressed.
For most games, digital versus analog triggers don't make a whole lot of difference, so I can understand why Nintendo took that direction. But analog triggers just seem more, satisfying. But with that caveat aside, I really do enjoy the Nintendo Pro Controller. Another great game controller comes from the same exact slate of current-gen consoles, and that's Sony's DualSense for the PlayStation 5.
This pad is a bit bigger compared to the Switch Pro Controller and brings a bit more weight with it too, but it still manages to be comfortable to hold for extended gaming sessions. It was definitely designed for larger hands in mind.
Mine are a bad example.
Which I am sure made a lot of older gamers happier. The face buttons are glossy. They still have the subtle click that other controllers offer, but the glossy finish does make the buttons a little more slippery than comparable pads. It brought the light bar functionality that Sony began with their DualShock 4 controllers from the PS4, but smartly minimized the design so it wasn't distracting, but can still provide players with information such as which controller number they have or game feedback. A small speaker is built in, allowing games to play different sounds through it to communicate information to the player. It's pretty cool when a character receives a call in the game and the phone conversation is played through the controller rather than the TV speakers. The big button in the middle of the controller is touch sensitive, meaning touch gestures can be completed on it as needed for the game. But the real exciting feature about the controller is the adaptive triggers. Sony designed the analog nature of the triggers to adapt to games and provide resistance to the button. If an action in the game would provide tension, such as pressing down on a spring, the triggers adapt to simulate that feeling. This is really cool in games with guns, as each gun can actually feel different to the player depending on the feedback and resistance the game is communicating to the controller.
Alright, let's talk about this thing.
The analog stick and directional pads are both placed in areas accessible to a player's left hand, making it nearly impossible to use at the same time. If they wanted us to use the D-pad with our left hand and the stick with our right, we lose easy access to the R button, face buttons, and the C buttons. Then, if Nintendo wanted us to use the D-pad to control a character and our other hand for the face buttons and ignore the stick entirely, that would almost make sense. But, surprise, now you're missing out on the Z button, which is on the back of the analog stick handle. But using the analog stick also means you can't really use the L button. Seriously, what did you want from us?
Really, the answer is probably that the N64 was Nintendo's first foray into 3D gaming and really one of the first big main attempts at it in general in the industry. I have a feeling that the reason they made the controller look this way is they were hedging their bets. If 3D gaming didn't end up taking off, they could just ignore the control stick and focus on the D-pad. And what you end up with is essentially just a really wide Super Nintendo controller. So I guess in a way, it's just too bad that Nintendo did such a good job at hitting their first attempt at 3D control out of the park with Super Mario 64, which was so perfectly executed that gamers were ready to keep looking to the future instead of looking back.
Here we go!
I feel like after mentioning Nintendo and Sony, Microsoft deserves a shout out. Other than their very first controller that they released on the original Xbox, they pretty much haven't rocked the boat and changed their design since the Xbox 360, even all the way up to the Xbox Series X and Series S controllers.
Not much has changed over the years. They wised up and added industry standard ports for headsets and microphones rather than forcing consumers to use their proprietary hardware. The analog sticks have a much nicer grip to them, and the controllers have struck the perfect size to be comfortable for nearly all hands. Their Series X and S versions did come with triggers that vibrate to provide additional feedback, and while it is a welcome addition, it doesn't really feel like a large step forward when compared to Sony's DualSense.
Xbox controllers really defined what a modern control pad should be. The dual stick being offset has been adopted by most third parties and even Nintendo themselves. So really, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But come on, Microsoft, could you please put some rechargeable batteries in your damn controllers? But my absolute favorite controller was one that was released way back in 2001. It did control the worst selling console of its generation, but even to this day it is still made by third parties and sometimes its original company itself to be used on their classic consoles or even new hardware with adapters. It is a dream to use, and it is, of course, the Nintendo GameCube controller.
I love the design of this thing. It curves on the top of the controller to come around to the handles, perfectly placing the triggers where your fingers naturally want to rest. There are defined spaces surrounding the analog sticks, ensuring that the player will know exactly what direction they are pointing the sticks in. The buttons are color-coded and vary in shape and size. The big green A button makes it clear that this is the major button that Nintendo will expect you to use. The red B button indicates it is the secondary button, and the gray X and Y buttons are there if you need them. The Z button makes a return, this time hanging out at the top of the controller, and is purple this time, ensuring that it will pop out to those who are looking around the controller for it. And the triggers, oh my god, did Nintendo ever nail those. They chose an analog design that, when pressed in all the way, ends in an extremely satisfying click. It definitely isn't without its flaws. The C-stick being small works, but is a little uncomfortable when compared to the main left stick, and it was a weird choice giving the right side a Z button, but not the left. But these issues are minor and don't really make much of a difference. The design is comfortable and fits hands like a glove. The buttons are easy to find and satisfying to use, and the triggers are so fun to use that I used to just press them when I was bored. Some controllers may be better and have more features, but for my money, it doesn't get much better than the GameCube.
Now, it's true, some controllers may feel a little bit more comfortable to you. They definitely might have more features, but for my money, it really doesn't get much better than the Nintendo GameCube. Everyone has their own unique experiences when it comes to gaming controllers, and the preference for which one is the best is easily going to change depending on the person, even if they've used every single game controller that's out there. I think the reason people get so passionate about which one is best is because using this thing that opens up vast worlds to us in our imagination creates such an intimate experience that you create a connection with it. But if you're somebody who says touchscreen is your favorite controller, you're dead wrong.